and I think we must have about 70 or something. We've run out of seats, which is a good position to be in, except it involves a lot of running about at the last minute. This room is air-conditioned. It doesn't feel like it to me, but I've been running around lifting chairs, but I think it'll cool down a bit. My name is Doug Sobey, and I'm the president of the Bedeck Area Historical Society, and I want to welcome you all this evening to the first of our summer series of 6 history talks. And I hope the remaining 5 are as popular, and that you, having come to one, will realize how entertaining they are and the wide variety of topics that we'll be covering. Now, there's no need for anyone to be standing. I see Tom, you're standing. There are chairs here at the front. Please come forward. 3 or 4 of you are still standing. And we have 5 or 6 chairs here empty, and we carried them down, so you're making our effort look wasted. So do come forward and sit in the chairs, and there are even more chairs arrived. Soon we'll have more chairs than people, and that's what we will be pleased to have. The 6 talks I'll speak about later after Ed MacDonald has delivered his talk. Dr. MacDonald is speaking on a topic which is particularly relevant this year, which is the 50th anniversary of the Benevolent Irish Society, established...
The 200.
200, yes, I knew it was 200. So it's the 200th anniversary of the founding of the Benevolent Irish Society in Charlottetown in the year 1825. Now, we have within our sort of catchment area of the Bedeck Museum a very substantial population of Irish due to the past history of the region. And Dr. Edward will be talking about that today, including it in his general talk of the Irish. But we, even without the 200th anniversary, we're going to be commemorating that, and have done so in the museum through a display on the history of Kincora and area. Not just Kincora, but the wider area around of Newton, Maple Plains, Littleton, South Freetown, and so on, where the Irish settled all in sort of one massive movement over a period of about 10 years or so in the late 1830s and 1840s, about a decade. Now, I'm not going to talk about that any further, but it may be covered in Dr. MacDonald's talk. So I want to introduce our speaker, and I'll get my sheet, but I think a lot of it I have in my head. Most of you already know of Dr. MacDonald. He is a professor emeritus at the University of Prince Edward Island. Recently emeritus, he just retired last year. But he is carrying on his interest in history in retirement, and I'm sure he's doing, continuing his research interests as well. Dr. Ed, as he was known and is known to his students at UPI, grew up in Newport, Prince Edward Island. Now, that sort of raises a sort of blank in an audience this far away, and it makes you realize how big Prince Edward Island is when you don't know where Newport is.
The town's on the outskirts.
But I can tell you, and this will help you a great deal, it lies exactly between Woodville Mills and DeGrosse Marsh. So now you know where it is. It's basically north of Georgetown, across the river from Georgetown, and you'll know Georgetown. And he had an interest in history right through his school and university career, and at the age of 16 he attended the University of Prince Edward Island and graduated in 1978 with a Bachelor of Arts degree in history, went on to Queen's to earn a master's and then a PhD. And he began his working career with the PEI Museum and Heritage Foundation as curator of history and editor of the Island magazine. And in 1985. In 2000, he joined the Department of History and Classics at UPEI, teaching Canadian, Atlantic, and Prince Edward Island history. And he performed various functions and roles in the university. He has authored, edited, or co-edited at least 9 books dealing with the social, political, religious, and environmental history of Prince Edward Island and its surroundings, including his best-known book, and probably still in print, I'm not sure, If You're Strong-Hearted, Prince Edward Island in the 20th Century, which was a millennial production in the year 2000, and most recently, The Summer Trade, a history of tourism on Prince Edward Island, written with Alan McEachran of the University of Western Ontario. And among his awards and distinctions are the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal for contributions to the culture and heritage of Prince Edward Island in 2012, the Heritage Canada's Lieutenant Governor's Award in 2014, the Canadian Catholic Historical Association's G.E. Clark Award, and the Award of Honour for Lifetime Achievement from the PEI Museum and Heritage Foundation in 2017. And just over a year ago, in December 2023, he was awarded, I suppose, the highest honour of all, the Order of Canada. So we're calling on this very distinguished historical writer and really storyteller, and many of you will have heard him before, to tell us, to talk about the subject of Irish immigration into Prince Edward Island, right from the beginning of, the 18th century, 1758, I think you said, to the 1850s. So, Ed, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Doug. Just Eddie Mickey Jerome from back at Cardigan, actually. By the way, are you sure you're not here for the card thing? It's in the basement of the church. Mary, I don't know if you wanted to talk about the BIS anniversary at the end?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much for coming. I will try not to do like my math prof in university and spit all over the front row of the class, which he did when he got excited. I have, sorry, I'm trying to get rid of something. Oh, it's changed itself. I'm cursed with knowing a little bit about a lot of things and a lot about very little. But back in 1990, the province decided to make Irish heritage the principal tourism theme. And we did an exhibit at the PI Museum on the Irish story on Prince Edward Island, and I was the researcher and wrote the text for it, and ended up learning more than I thought I knew about Irish history. And then, of course, I've taught in my course in PI history. But I don't pretend to be an expert, and there are experts in the room. So I'm a little bit nervous about talking about the Irish, especially as a MacDonald. I know there are Irish MacDonalds. I just want to assure you that on my mother's side, I'm Irish all the way back. On St. Patrick's Day, I'm a Sharkey, and a McCardle, and a McQuaid, and Fitzgerald, and a Hayfie. And the rest of the time, I'm a MacDonald. So we're going to talk today about Irish immigration to Prince Edward Island. I just want to go back, if it will go back. The mouse is not talking to the cat. should be this one, but it's not moving. I'm already in slide 4, which is good. Let me walk up. See if the mouse, if I could get the mouse to work. I'll put this in my pocket. Like anyone who was a student of mine will appreciate how poorly I use the technology available to me.
There's the mouse on the screen.
Can you see the mouse? So what I want to do, because with no slides, I'll do with my hands.
Now, is that going
I want to go back.
Yeah, okay.
If it will go back. Very good. Very good. I wanted to begin. Yeah, that's good.
I'm answering now for the
Yeah, so then that works.
rather than the mouse.
Yeah. I want to pay tribute to Brendan O'Grady, who's no longer with us, although he lived and taught into his 90s, who's really the true expert, not only with his own research, but as a facilitator, as an encourager, and as an editor of other people's Irish research on PEI. So I want to make a reference to him. And I want to talk, first of all, we need to dispel the myth. And the myth has to do with how and why the Irish came to Prince Edward Island. When I was a kid, most Irish Islanders simply assumed that their people had come to Prince Edward Island fleeing the Great Famine of 1845 to 1852. The Great Famine is not a myth. The famine was a devastating physical, cultural, and economic cataclysm in Irish history. It killed over 1 million people. 1 million people emigrated. And the Gaelic world of Ireland was undermined incredibly. The problem when it comes to Prince Edward Island is that, as many people now know, the bulk of the Irish were already on Prince Edward Island before the Great Famine struck. So most people think, used to think, i.e. not yourselves, those people that I'm referring to, that this is our story. Destitute refugees in rags, fleeing Ireland in coffin ships, and dying by the droves. There were vessels arriving on Prince Edward Island, as you know, the genealogists among you, and I can see a number of them, can tell you. The Lady Constable, Margaret Pollock, were devastated by epidemics on board. We did get some vessels coming here during the Great Famine, but by then we're at the very last legs of Irish immigration. But that is not to say that before the Great Famine, the Irish people did not suffer. That is not to say they were not poor and hungry and oppressed and rebellious. In fact, between 1801 and 1845, the outbreak of the famine, over 1 million Irish people actually emigrated from Ireland. So there was good reason to leave. There are a couple of mantras about immigration that I think I invented, but I didn't. One is that there's a formula for emigration. When your fear for the future and the place that you live is greater than your fear of the unknown, then if you can, you will leave. That's what happened in the Highlands of Scotland, and that was what was happening in Ireland. Push factors drive people out from a place. Why they decide to come to some other place is the pull factor. Well, as you know, Prince Edward Island didn't become the mecca for Irish emigration out of Ireland. Out of that 1 million people who left, we didn't even get a trickle. We got a dribble. And yet those people coming to this small place had an incalculable impact on the history of the province. That's what we want to explore a little bit. Why did they come here? Who were they? A lot of that information is somewhat lost to history. Some of it survives in oral memory, in family history. But I want to begin by talking about the push factor. What was it pushing people out of Ireland? Now, the bulk of Irish immigration starts as soon as we become a colony of Britain, and it lasts until the early 1850s. It's essentially over by 1848 or 49. But the bulk of the people came out after about 1820. What was the Ireland that they were leaving? So I want to take what would normally be a year's worth of a good course in Irish history and summarize it in 5 minutes. Unless you're my mother, in which case there would be a number of side trips and it would take at least 45 minutes to cover the 5 minutes. Unfortunately, my mother's not still with us. But she was very proud to be Irish, in fact. She was about 5 feet tall, and whenever she talked about Ireland, she squared her shoulders. Every time. She didn't even know that she did it. This is the slide you want to study for the midterm. What were the problems? Ireland was suffering by the 1830s from overpopulation. Significant, rapid population growth. In fact, the population of Ireland in 1800 was only about 5 million, which is, I think, about what it is today. And in 45 years, it was estimated at 8.5 million. And they don't really entirely know why. Well, I mean, they were making babies. But there are lots of theories about that. One of them is that as conditions economically started to slide in Ireland, people used to wait until later to get married. Wait until they had established themselves. But as the prospects for the future grew dim, the libido did not, and people didn't wait as long. So people were getting married younger and starting their families younger. And one of the reasons that they were able to survive was because of a new crop that I'm going to come to in a couple of minutes. So overpopulation, too many people sharing too small a pot. And there were land issues. It's no surprise that Irish Islanders, once they got established here, often joined reform movements, because we had a land question on Prince Edward Island. We had absentee landlords owning the entire colony and renting out farms. Duh, exactly like the situation in Ireland, where it was in fact even worse, where 5% of the population owned virtually all of the land. You could reverse that and say that 95% of the population only owned 5% of the land. Farms were incredibly small. I was reading about some of the settlers coming out in the 30s from Monaghan, and they were farming farms 2, 3, 7 acres. But there were smaller farms than that. As the population went up, farms were subdivided and subdivided. There was a class of laborers in Ireland who didn't own any land to grow their food on. They had to earn the food they bought to feed themselves. There were another class of Irish, cottier class, who didn't rent land. They rented the permission to use the land for part of the year to grow their potato crop. So land was a problem, and protest over land was a problem. Then there was the dangerous over-reliance on the potato. As we know, anybody who grew up on Prince Edward Island, my father-in-law could not consider that it had a meal unless it included a bunch of potatoes, 2 or 3 pounds worth. He lived to be over 90, so it's a nutritious food. And it had come from the New World to Europe, where it was was originally considered an exotic plant, a poisonous plant. Then they discovered the tuber part was pretty good, and it grew really well in parts of Europe where it was often difficult to grow grain, and it became a staple crop in Scandinavia, Scotland, and Ireland. And in fact, that's one of the reasons that the population increase was possible, was because of the spread of the potato. The problem was the poor Irish came to rely almost entirely on the potato for their food crop. Yes, they're growing grain to export. Yes, they had, pigs that they were raising to sell to pay their rent, and they were eating the potato. And the problem with that is, what if the potato crop fails? The Great Famine was caused by a failure year after year due to late blight, which came to Ireland from North America, by the way. Repeated failure of the potato crop caused the Great Famine. But there were failures of the potato crop. If I could consult the notes I took in 1990, which I can't find right now, there were something like 22 partial or entire failures of the potato crop in the previous 50 years. So that's kind of a forerunner of what was to happen. Political unrest we hardly need to talk about, because the political unrest still persists in Ireland. Ireland was the first of the colonies acquired by Britain, by England, and it was the least happy colony probably in the British Empire, which repeatedly rebelled and in between schemed about rebellion. It seethed with unrest. And on top of that, the Irish were struggling, the Catholic Irish, and we have to remember that there are a fairly large number of Irish people who aren't Roman Catholics. But the Catholic Irish are struggling in the 1810s and 20s for civil emancipation, the right to vote and to hold office. And there were penal laws in place which were not necessarily enforced in all places at all times, but they were on the books, which were very restrictive. And so Ireland sees with political unrest and sectarian unrest. In Britain, Catholics were emancipated in 1829. And that caused a wave of fear through Protestant Ireland, that these newly empowered, even though the property franchise restricted the number of people that could actually vote, almost at the same time there was an evangelical revival in Ireland among the Protestant sects. And that increased what had been, many of the rebels in Ireland in the previous time period were actually Protestant Irish leaders, but it increased this sectarian, animosity or tension. Are you ready to leave yet?
We're with you.
It's hard to leave Ireland. We took our mother there, my brother and I, in 1983. And it was the most wonderful trip of my life. In fact, I gave a banquet talk about it a couple of years ago. She could have been abducted by the IRA, and she would have said, but they were nice fellows. She didn't care. She just sat in the back seat and smoked. We took the camera away from her when she walked out in the middle of the road on a blind turn to take a photograph of the thatch. And a car came whizzing by. I said, okay, take the camera. She couldn't read the map. Anyway, but I digress. That's a different topic. So, Ireland is primed for emigration. But this is in the days before you can just go buy a ticket on a ship. Say, well, I'm going to go on the Titanic. No, sorry. Maybe not the Titanic. Bad choice. But I'm going to buy a ticket on a passenger ship going to the New World. People, if they have the means to emigrate, you still have to find a way to emigrate. There have to be ships that are crossing the Atlantic Ocean going where you want to go. And so opportunism often helps to govern where people choose to go. Now, I have been told that people were being recruited to emigrate to the Maritimes, being told you could walk to Boston from there. And it's true, you can. You might wear out a few pairs of shoes. M.J. McPhee apparently walked home to my community from Boston. I forget how many pairs of shoes he said he walked through. That was in the recent past, though. So, not desperate, not refugees, but increasingly poor, the Irish left. And they left for the same reason everybody came to the New World. To find a better life. All right. Part 2. The peopling of Prince Edward Island. Just with the Irish, in this case. By the way, I'm not identifying the slides. These are generic slides for the most part from the time period. We don't have slides of Irish people coming to Prince Edward Island. But they are leaving from places like West Cork. So Brendan O'Grady has divided up the story of immigration to Prince Edward Island into 3 phases or stages. And his division, I think, still works. So phase 1 is really not a pattern or trend at all. In phase 1, between the time we become a colony of Britain in 1763 officially and early 1800s, there's no pattern. People come, there's a flotsam and kind of a jetsam aspect to it. You have disbanded soldiers, people who come to serve in our garrison. You have got people who are recruited as settlers, and you've got most of the senior officials of our colony in the early going have Irish roots. Unfortunately, they didn't leave behind illustrations, so it's kind of hard for me to show you photographs or pictures. But here's a couple of examples. The first of our governors, Walter Patterson. You can't tell from the picture, but he was crooked as a ram's horn. From up north in Donegal. Edmund Fanning, I'm stretching it a little bit. I think he was born in the United States, but he was of Irish ancestry. He was a loyalist. Lord Selkirk said he was a man of no superabundant head, meaning he thought he was stupid. He was the only one of our governors until 1825 not to be recalled in disgrace. I think he was pretty smart. But Phillips Callback, J.B. Palmer, we could make a long list of early island officials who hailed from Ireland. Usually, in this case, the ascendancy class, the Church of Ireland. So there are Protestants and Catholics. There are people at the bottom rung of the social ladder and at the very top rung. We know a little bit, thanks to a colleague of mine from Ireland, Stephen Royal, who thankfully used the English spelling of his name for this article. He uncovered in Ireland leases from the Desbrizay family. Now, that's actually not an Irish name, it's a Huguenot name. And he didn't come out to Prince Edward Island. He got appointed to the job, and they had to threaten to fire him a decade later before he finally came out to Prince Edward Island. And he made Walter Patterson look moral in some ways. He was recruiting from Northern Ireland well before that became the trend of Irish emigration. Some of the surnames are familiar, but a lot of them aren't, because it's hard to say most of these people didn't stay. This is very early on in the settlement period of Prince Edward Island. Very difficult to be a new settler, especially if you're not sure of your land title. And I think, I can't remember the details, but I think Desbrizay had mortgaged his estate on Prince Edward Island, and it was not clear whether they could get a title clearly to their land. Anyway, a lot of them didn't stay. He did, and he became a part of the local elite. And then maybe some of you may have been able to track some of these people forward. This is an illustration from issue 51 of the Island magazine. So that's over 20 years ago. So there's no stream, there's no flow of immigration, it's just kind of happenstance. But then, in Ireland itself, beginning around the turn of the 1800s, there was a distinct trend of immigration. Much of the immigration out of Ireland to North America in the first 3 decades of the 1800s was from the southeastern part of Ireland. And that's why my grandmother Fitzgerald, her people were from the southeast of Ireland, came out around 1810. A lot of family names can be traced to Wexford, Kilkenny, Waterford, the eastern part of Cork, edging up the coast a little bit to Dublin area, but really concentrating in this area here. Why are they leaving? There were specific reasons that was exacerbating the tenancy situation in that part of Ireland. But they had a particular advantage. If you wanted to emigrate from any place in Ireland, as I said, you had to have a way across the Atlantic Ocean. It was a lot easier for people living in this part of Ireland to get a passage to the New World, because it's one of the last places that vessels stopped on their way from the British Isles to North America. Whether you were fishing vessels or trading vessels, virtually everybody stopped in Cork, Waterford, to take on supplies, and often, if they were going to be involved in the fishery, to hire people to work in the fishery. And so, it provided opportunity. If you were a timber ship, for example, and the timber industry really gets started around 1806, Doug Sobey's, he's probably gone with a fever now, but if he's still here, Doug's done some incredibly good work on this. If you have a timber ship, you often didn't have a cargo coming across to the New World to get your wood. So you're looking for something to provide a little bit of income, so you're not sailing in ballast. And one of the things you could do is fit up the lower part of your lumber vessel to carry emigrants. And so you find people taking advantage of regular trading links between Britain and maritime Canada to get to the New World. These are a few illustrations that I found online from 1841. So it's close to the period that we're talking about, and I just thought that I would show them to you. I found them. I'm the speaker. I get to do that. The quay at Waterford and the Herbert Cove, the port associated with Cork, principal departure ports. So some of those people came directly to Prince Edward Island, some of them came to Halifax and found their way to Prince Edward Island because they heard there was land here. Some of them went to fish in Newfoundland. Now I know some of you are saying yes, and they got there and said, well, I'm not staying here. I think more optimistically, they were trying to make enough money to, they would either stay in Newfoundland or they were trying to make enough money to proceed to some place where they could farm. Because the Irish are farmers and there's not a lot of agricultural land in Newfoundland. Lots of fishing, and as you know, Ireland is about half Irish in extraction, a little less than half. So two boaters, like the Hayfies on my mother's side of the family, originally came to Newfoundland and then later on went to Prince Edward Island. Some of them would later on go to New Brunswick. And then Halifax is an Irish town in large measure when it comes to the Catholics in Nova Scotia. And so they find their way to Prince Edward Island as opposed to necessarily being recruited, although some of that does happen as well. So we could talk more about the southeast of Ireland. If we go back, actually, because it's difficult to, just looking here at numbers, it's difficult to know how many people came because the passenger lists don't exist except for a handful of vessels. You have to rely on reading the newspapers where they exist, which is, there are gaps, and saying a vessel arrived with 219 individuals from Ireland. And so Brendan O'Grady was trying to cumulatively add up how many people are we talking about. So from the southeast of Ireland, he's been able to identify at least 1,800. He also went to the graveyards across the province and looked at the gravestones and tried to find out if it said where people were from in Ireland. So, about 1,800. Doesn't sound like much, does it? Smaller than the town of Montague. But, remember, in 1800, for example, the population of Prince Edward Island was only about 5,000 people. So we're still, and in 1827 or 1832, it's still less than 30,000 people. So 1,800 people is large enough to make a difference when they come to Prince Edward Island. And then when we get forward to the largest single source of immigrants, Ulster, the north of Ireland, we're talking about 4,000 people. Now, how many people here have ancestors from County Monaghan? So quite a significant number. Well, here's why. By the way, this is a painting that I found online of Market Day in Monaghan Town in 1830. This is perfect. This is the Mayflower year for Northern Irish immigration to Prince Edward Island. And here is a glimpse at what it might have looked like. I did not get the permission to reproduce the portrait. So nobody go online, I know you're filming this, nobody go online and advertise that I got that illustration. Here we are back with Ireland. I cleverly drew the circle on the map. So here's Ulster, one of the kingdoms, the ancient kingdoms of Ireland. So why suddenly do we start getting people from County Monaghan? Well, because that's where people start leaving in droves from Ireland, beginning around 1825. And that has something to do with economic trends in Northern Ireland. Now, Ulster had been one of the most prosperous parts of Ireland, comparatively speaking. And part of it was because they were able to supplement their income by linen weaving. There was a cottage industry, a very well organized one, where people wove cloth in their cottages. And so there's a couple of illustrations from the time period. So here's, see the loom in the background, the woman spinning, and it's a bit chauvinistic because it has a pig inside the cottage, and that is a racist trope of the Irish, is that they live in the same home with their pigs. And if that was true, it's because your pig was what you were paying your rent with. So it was quite a valuable commodity. But the beetling, I had to look it up, you beat the cloth with a wooden club to flatten the fibers, and apparently it brings out a lustrous sheen. All of which is great, but it's labor intensive. And something happened in the British Isles called the Industrial Revolution, where they mechanized the weaving of cloth. And all of a sudden, cotton became incredibly cheap compared to other kinds of cloth. And it basically destroyed the linen industry in Northern Ireland, which destroyed an important income supplement for the Northern Irish, which meant people emigrated in droves. A lot of them went to work in factories in England and Scotland, as it turns out. A lot of them were going to the New World. So this picture from 1841 was already, in some ways, antiquated. So if you were not from PEI, and somebody asked you, name the counties of Ireland, how many are there, 32 counties?
Yeah.
If you weren't from PEI, how many people do you think would think of Monaghan? They think of Kerry and Wexford and Waterford. They would think of Donegal, Sligo, my favorite. But Monaghan, the county of the Little Hills, is not really very prominent in the story of Ireland, but it's very prominent in the story of Ireland on Prince Edward Island. And that is because of a specific series of events. which in a small place can make a big difference. And the one thing, I could tell you many stories about my mother in County Monaghan, but one of the things that struck us was how much it looked like PEI. How many people have been to County Monaghan? Yeah, if you could take out like the stone walls, it looks a lot like PEI. It looks a lot like Central Queens County. Not like Newport, as it turns out, which is one of the more boring places on PEI. And it comes back to Father John MacDonald, whose father, Captain John MacDonald, had been the arbiter of the first major Highland Scots Catholic emigration to Prince Edward in 1772. And who at one time owned Lot 35 and Lot 36 in the Tracadie area, and left them to his children. Father John was in the seminary when Captain John MacDonald died. Captain John was deeply in debt, as many of the proprietors. He was actually a proprietor who moved and lived on Prince Edward Island at least part of the time. He was in England for quite a long time as well. So Father John MacDonald didn't have enough money to get through the seminary because the family had no money. So he worked out a deal with the Bishop of Glasgow, who sponsored his tuition in the seminary in return for him coming to work among the Catholics of Glasgow. Now, there were some Highland Scots Catholics in Glasgow, but most of the Catholics in Glasgow were Irish immigrants from the north of Ireland who had come to Scotland looking for work. So Father John was working in Glasgow. By the way, he was a very cranky person. You may catch a little bit of that. Like the MacDonalds, he kind of stood on his pride. Anyway, he had inherited an estate that didn't have a lot of settlers. He had a bunch of parishioners, some of them interested in emigrating, and he encouraged them to settle on his estate on Prince Edward Island, which is why the most Irish place on Prince Edward Island, arguably, is Fort Augustus, which has a Scottish name. Because the name came before the Irish settlers. It was named after places in Scotland by the MacDonalds. Now, you don't have to go too far into the back country from Fort Augustus before you get to the Donas, the Dromores, the best moonshine possibly made of Prince Edward Island. I played hockey with a bunch of guys from there, and they always had shine in the dressing room mixed with apple juice. I'd only ever had it as a hot toddy. Both bad. Whoops. Oops. Uh-oh. I've done something. In fact, I don't know what I did. I knew the fates were going to get me for making that joke. In 1830, on board a vessel called the Corsair, he brought out 206 Irish Catholic settlers, many of them from County Monaghan, to Fort Augustus. And as happens still today, chain migration results. If people come to a new place and things are good, word comes back. And if you're going to emigrate, take that great step into the unknown. Don't you tend to want to go where there are friends and neighbors, where people speak your language, where people understand your customs? And so, a settlement acts like a magnet. If it prospers, it draws people after it. Now, Father John MacDonald, being a priest, had some cred, and he became loose allies with a parish priest in Monaghan named Patrick Moyna, who was the parish priest in Dona? In Dona. And he had a curate, apparently, who was dead set against immigration to PEI, but he was very supportive. So I found this slide. It's not Father Patrick Moyna, but it's a priest. This is why I think everything went off. It's a priest giving a blessing to a family before they emigrate. He was the facilitator of this chain migration of people from County Monaghan particularly. Now, you're going to see people from Armagh, from Derry, but overwhelmingly the Ulster people are from Monaghan. And they're coming to Prince Edward Island beginning really around 1830 until about 1850. So they overlap with the southeastern Irish. They don't stop coming from the southeast just because there are people coming from Monaghan. But Monaghan swells much larger as an immigrant group. These are the baronies of County Monaghan. It's the central and northern part of Monaghan that provides most of the people. Yeah, true. My Sharkey ancestors are from right here, so just outside that area. Sharkey's not a Monaghan name, but he was married to a MacDonald, and that is a Monaghan name. Not that the lecture's about my family. Well, it is. This is a different map just showing you the parishes. After we were in Ireland, my mother, if you want to be well received in Ireland, take your mother there. They thought we were the two best known fellows that ever crossed their threshold. And then they wrote asking us to make a donation to the cathedral they were building. Which did happen. Anyway. So, you have this drop of Irish immigration between 1763 and about 1800, 1810. And then you have this drip of southeastern Irish. And then you have a trickle from Northern Ireland, from County Monaghan. Where did they go? Where did they settle? Well, we know they settled in Fort Augustus because Father John MacDonald had an estate there on the eastern side of the Hillsborough River. But you have to also remember, and this is, it's a really logical point, and yet we need to be reminded. The bulk of the Irish are coming later on in the settlement era on Prince Edward Island. The settlement era on Prince Edward Island is essentially over by 1850. Why? Because our major resource, our major attraction is land. And by 1850, the land is all spoken for. But where do you settle first? Because people only have a vague notion of how good land is. They look at the trees and they go, well, that's probably fertile. Lot 54 was calculated by Samuel Holland as fertile. Not, as it turns out, because you're guessing. So the first place you settle is the place that's easiest to reach. And where is it easiest to reach? Along the waterways, because the roads are blazed trails through the woods. Travel writers in the 1840s are amazed at how many islanders still use carts. And they think it's a cultural thing. I think it's because the roads are so bad. The roads are still bad. But early settlers settled along the waterways and the coast. But the bulk of the Irish come later. All that land is spoken for. So the Irish go, they go to one of two places. They stay in Charlottetown, and by 1864, Brendan O'Grady found they're the largest single group in Charlottetown, are the Irish. Charlottetown is an Irish town. But if they don't stay in Charlottetown, they fan out through the countryside, looking for available land. And that means you overwhelmingly find them in the interior of the townships, the places that are just now opening up to settlement, and curiously, along the county lines. But how do you get there? The Kincora book, which I'm going to reference here in a minute or two, the great community history, Kincora and area by Kevin Farmer. Really, really well done. And he begins a chapter with an oral memory of a little girl walking with her family from Charlottetown to Kincora to take up their land. And how footsore she was, and how she dumped some of what she was supposed to be carrying to lighten her load. When you go into the interior, settlement follows roads. If you open up a road, and usually open up a road because people are already getting into that area, but when you open up a road, settlement follows. And the surveyors follow. It's no surprise that most stretches of road on PEI, if you stripped away what you see now, there's a farm every 10 chains. Every 660 feet, there's a farm boundary, because they laid out farms of 50 to 100 acres. And you could play hopscotch from house to house. So the Irish come later, so they end up in the interior. And A.H. Clarke, who the first time I read his book, published in 1959, I thought was the most boring book I ever read. It was historical geography. Then I read the footnotes, which were twice as interesting as the text. And then I went back to use it as a source and went, this guy's really good. Had island roots, of course, by the way. This is a census map. It only shows people born in Ireland. And it only shows the dots are on the township. They're not exactly where in the township people are living. But even so, you can see the clustering along the county lines, and you can see settlement in the interior. As I said, what it doesn't show is if you were an Irish Islander born on PEI, you're not showing up on his map. Not a lot of Irish people down in the southern. Yes, Presbyterian Scots, Guernsey, English. Not as many Irish in Kings County. A lot of Highland Scots in Kings, actually not as many people in Kings County. But look at Queens County. Doesn't look like there's a lot of Irish up west, but that's because most of those Irish had settled there around 1801. So most of the Irish in that area weren't born in Ireland. So I'm going to end by revealing the extent of my ignorance about the Irish next door. George Dalton was telling me that he might mention, if I bring up the Irish in Summerside, and Doug had said, you could talk about the Irish that are close to Bedeck. I ignored Summerside. Oh yeah, Summerside's close to Bedeck. Obviously, we're talking about the interior. So I want to talk about the Irish in Kincora area and Kelly's Cross. Partly because I misread the map and thought Kelly's Cross was closer to you than it is. Partly because my grandfather had relatives in Kelly's Cross. And in the 1920s, once every year when the crops were in, he would take his horse and buggy, and he would drive from Coraville. You're all going, yeah, I know where that is. Between Cardigan and St. Peter's Bay to Kelly's Cross. And he would stay a week to visit his relatives.
What was their names?
My mother didn't tell me that. Either McCardle or McQuaid. His mother would have been a McQuaid. His grandmother would have been a McCardle. And there were Sharkies in Summerside, but he didn't go visit them because they trespassed. Went to work in the shipyard in Summerside and married a Protestant and converted. Anyway, so I'm going to talk just very briefly about that. I thought, as a joke, I would start with this illustration from Meacham's Atlas, because if you look at Meacham's Atlas, all of the engravings of churches are Catholic churches. Apparently, we're the only ones willing to spend money. But this church actually hadn't been built. In the Burke History of the Parishes, written in 1885, he says, and soon they'll build that church that they have illustrated in Meacham's Atlas. I don't know whether they ever did build that church.
I don't think they did.
I think they skipped to something even more elaborate, which burned. And then they built one in brick and it fell down.
The very first one was a very small one, and it was built by the Protestant people came from the Krakow area to help, and remember one guy was killed?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe it's the one in the back. No, that's somebody's projection of it. It never happened.
Anyway, I got that. Meacham's lied.
Yeah.
That's right up there with the engraving in Meacham's, where if you look in the background, there's a horse, and there's a little bit of line drawing going, this horse is 27 years old. Brendan O'Grady's book included this map of some Irish place names on Prince Edward Island. It's not as easy to visualize the pattern of settlement from looking at the map, but it does give you an idea of some settlements associated with the Irish. But as I said, I wanted to, with apologies to Summerside, I want to talk a little bit about this module of Irish settlement, the back of the lots, straddling the county line in the center of Queens County. And the settlements in Kincora and surrounding area were established when they were because they built a road. The Anderson Road was built connecting Charlottetown and Badet. And that provided access to the land that they were renting. Now, in Kincora, they were lucky because they got good land. Other places, they settled because opportunistically it was available, and it turned out not to be very good land. So this is a map from 1832, just before the Anderson Road was built, or I would try to show it to you. And I'm going to lean a little bit on Kevin Farmer's book around Kincora. Even the cover was nice for that. But first I want to talk about the parish history written by Father A.E. Burke, Irish from Georgetown, and a story in his own right. But as a young priest, he was engaged to write a history of the diocese, which was going to be sold by subscription, except they didn't get enough people subscribing, and so the book never came out, and the parish histories were set aside and rediscovered in the 1950s. So he's writing in the 1880s. He is talking to people who had emigrated to these communities, and he's asking them, where did you come from? Who were the first people in the community? So Burke is not always right, although that never stopped him. But he's close to the events. And here's his list of some of the early settlers. The earliest settler, this is, yes, the earliest settlers. So they're Brennans, Keefs, we have at least one Keef here, several Keefs here, Cals, Walshes, Murphys, Smith, which is kind of a camouflage name. Anybody can be a Smith.
It was our great-grandfather, John Smith.
Kellys, McCarvilles. These people are coming out. He has it circa 1835. Basically, as Doug observed, between about 1832 and 1841, most of the Irish in these areas, this is when they come out to settle. Anyway, you just look at those and you go, yep. The most common Irish names on PAI, by the way, are Trainer, McKenna, I believe. And Kelly is up there as well. Trainer and McKenna from Monaghan. Kevin Farmer came up with this list, so this is just, I took a screenshot of his book. He did a little more research, and he was looking at leases signed with the Mann family. Horatio Mann was the proprietor. He had inherited the estate through his wife, who had inherited from her father. So that adds a few other names. One of the points that he makes is that almost all of these individuals were able to pay their passage across the Atlantic. They were not impoverished. They were apparently among the better off set of people living on the estate in Ireland that they came from. Like a lot of the settlers in the Belfast area, they too were the better off of the tenants who said, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. I've got a little bit of money. I'm coming to the New World. Signing leases with staggered rents. These leases were for 999 years. And here's the church in Kelly's Cross that burned in 1914. Designed by W.C. Harris. You can tell it's a Harris church. You just have to look at it and know it's a Harris church. They've had bad luck with the churches in Kelly's Cross. The origin story in Kelly's Cross is that a guy named John Creamer from County Longford was the original settler. And he helped, his wife was supposedly from Monaghan, although Brendan and Grady think she's not from Monaghan because her last name's not right. But they certainly provided succor to the Monaghan Irish, and again, mostly Monaghan people coming into the area. In fact, many of them from one part of Monaghan and Donagh. Monaghan's, Kellys. Robin Craig is a Protestant. He's identified in the Burke history. There's a bracket after his name, who's Protestant. No, no, he just lists them as one of the settlers in the community, but I don't think he's, and it's a list as opposed to, these people came and they settled here, and these people came and settled there.
Yeah, because I had, with some of my research found that they had settled around the Inchman Road area, which is between Holy Cross and Game Gorge.
Okay,
I'm trying to find out more.
yeah, no, that's where I can reveal my ignorance with a blush in the dark. W.W. Lord, who lived most of his life in Water Street in Charlottetown, he was a businessman, an exporter, shipbuilder. So one of the advantages for people coming to Kincora and Kelly's Cross is that there's a nearby community. People in the Kincora area benefited greatly because there was a Badek, a settled area, a prosperous area that provided jobs and employment and a nearby access to the sea. Similarly, Man is a big employer. He built, I forget how many ships, does it say, 45 ships or something? It was quite a number of vessels. And he's involved in the timber trade, and he's importing other kinds of materials. So not only can you get a passage across to the New World with Horatio Mann, but you can probably get a job. A little bit like the Yos in Port Hill, not as predatory. Did I say that? I think one of the only things I know about Lord is, I think his daughter or his wife, I think it was his wife, caught fire from the fireplace and burned to death. Her dress went on fire. Yeah, it was a horrible tragedy. So, I've talked about why the Irish were leaving Ireland and come to Prince Edward Island. I've tried to look at the patterns of settlement, and I've tried to talk about where they settled. What we still don't really know enough about is what culture did they transplant with them? Did they keen at wakes? Certainly some of their belief in the supernatural. It persisted.
Explain keening to people.
Keening is what Island Scots wouldn't do at a wake, which is show a lot of emotion. And you had professional keeners as well that would set up a lament. I have not heard keening, but apparently it was a particular crying. Yeah. Now, certainly, I mean, I grew up with hearing about wakes where people stayed up all night with the corpse. There was visiting, maybe perhaps a libation, not in the same room. There was a community comforting each other. So versions of Irish culture certainly transplant, but sometimes it's hard to say, is that Irish, or is that Highland Scots, or is that PEI? That's up to you to find out, because I'm retired. Anyway, thank you very much. I am willing to take questions. I may not be able to give answers. But if there are questions. And, oh, sorry, yes. I always say that and then I never look to find out who has their hand up.
Is there any evidence that any of the Irish settlers came into Badek as their landing port in PEI? I was doing some extra reading before this talk, and I didn't come across any evidence of that. The evidence I came across, and this tends to be the immigration trend, that they land in Charlottetown and they proceed from there. In the beginning of settlement, when there aren't any roads, the vessel comes to where you're settling. The Corsair goes up the Hillsborough River, partly because it can easily. But the New London settlement, the Elizabeth comes to New London. The Alexander comes to Tracadie. But by the 1830s and 40s, when there's a rudimentary road system, a lot of the emigrant vessels arrive in Charlottetown, and they disperse from there. Some of them stay in the city, some of them go out. So it's possible they could have come to Badek, but I don't think the folks are doing a lot of the trading and shipbuilding in Badek. And I don't know if they've got trading connections with Ireland that would have provided. If they did, it's possible. But I don't know if anyone else can address that. Okay, next.
I was just wondering, you said there was a big increase in the birth rate in children. What supported that, or what caused it? Do you know?
Well,
Like,
I
was
think
there-
people are marrying earlier.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, she was asking why the birth rate was going up. So I think the birth rate may have been the same. The nutrition level was higher. The potato provided a lot of, so I think a lot more babies are surviving. I mean, the mortality rate is still extremely high for infants all across Europe at that time. But people are also marrying younger because they're not waiting to establish themselves because they don't think their prospects are going to allow that. So why wait to get married if at 25 I'm going to be in the same state I'm at now? So they do have some evidence that people are marrying at a younger age, which means women are conceiving and having more babies. And then even if it's a high mortality rate, more of those babies are surviving. So they think that's part of the reason the potato is part of the reason. But back when I was doing the research years ago, nobody knew really why the population soared. And the population soars when 1 million people emigrated during that time period. So it's from 5 million to 8.5 million, while 1 million people are leaving.
I'm just wondering if there was a resurgence in Roman Catholicism or the beliefs of that.
Well, Roman Catholicism, that's a really good thought, because the Roman Catholic faith persisted in the breach in Ireland, so it had to be under the radar. There's no established church. There's no ecclesiastical framework. Soon as there is, the Catholic Church kind of frowns on sex. Especially sex before marriage. So it's possible, but I think if that was the case, there would be the same number of kids born, they just wouldn't be born in wedlock. It's a really interesting thought, but I'm not convinced that that would be the reason. That might be a discouragement to population increase. Certainly by the early 1900s in Ireland, people were waiting a long time to get married. The average age of marriage goes way up. I have a colleague who teaches an Irish history course, and I was really quite, I won't say stunned, but surprised. And it's because people are waiting longer to kind of establish themselves before they wed. But apparently that's not happening in the early 1800s, for whatever reason. Yes, and then we'll come back here.
You mentioned the book by Reverend Burke.
A.E. Burke, yes.
A.E. Burke, 1885. Did you say it was published, or
It was never published, but
where do you find it, or is it
it's,
available?
if you can read it online through the library at the university, there's
Okay.
the digitized copy.
Yeah.
A guy named Ernie MacDonald, a social worker from Cardigan, in his retirement transcribed it. And they digitized the transcription that he did. I believe it was also published in The Guardian when it was kind of rediscovered. I'm curious whether Father John C. McMillan, who wrote a history of the Catholic Church in Prince Edward Island, was aware of that. He's writing in, the first book is published in 1905, and he doesn't seem to be using Burke. And Burke's got all kinds of interesting, funny stories, as well as that kind of information. So anyway, if you go online at the library, do a keyword search under Island Lives. That's where the digitized ones are. And I would use Ernie MacDonald's name, Ernest MacDonald, and that's the first thing that comes up. And he calls it the Burke Chronicles.
Thank you.
I think that that gentleman must have published a few hard copies, because I do have one.
Do you?
Yes. It's got a white cover.
Yeah. Well, I know that Ernest MacDonald did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have
Father Burke, I actually didn't know it was Ernest MacDonald, his book, that I found out that it was conceived as a book they were going to sell by subscription to mark the 25th anniversary of the episcopacy of that bishop at the time, who was a McIntyre. And Father Burke was quite brilliant, but somewhat erratic. And the bishop, when he came to PI first, he kept him as a secretary at the palace. And I think he said, here's something for you to do.
And I think it includes a couple of parishes, history of a couple of parishes that Father Burke didn't have in the main body of his work earlier, which came to light later
Yeah.
on, and they're now included.
And Amy Pope, W.H. Pope's, one of the daughters of W.H. Pope, she was writing a history of some parishes. And I would like to know how much Father Burke stole from her. Because I think he did. And he praises her in print later on. He says, people aren't aware, Amy Pope, she's done a lot of great writing on the Catholic faith. But whatever work she did on the parishes is referenced, but no longer extant. So, anyway, it's another article that I published one time. Yes?
Were these immigrants well received when they arrived, or was there reluctance to have them coming, or were they happy to see them?
That story, there's kind of a macro story and an individual story. So on a personal, individual level, we're often quite well received. David Ross, who was a cantankerous Scots farmer, lived in Marshfield on the Hillsborough River. He has a diary from 1840 to about 1880, or 1830 something, 1880. He does not like the Irish. He's a Presbyterian Scot. He says, horde of Irish marched through my farm last night on their way to Fort Augustus. Fear plays a big role. So Roman Catholic Scots were not as threatening to Protestant Scots and Protestant English as the Irish were. It's hard for us to consider today, when everyone's lumped into European settler, colonial settler, the Irish were considered a separate inferior race by the English. In the same way that many Irish Americans thought black people were inherently an inferior race. So the Irish swell the number of Catholics, which is a bit threatening to I guess, the ascendancy of the Protestant. But they're also Irish, and that also represents other, something foreign. And so if there are a few Irish, it's the same with anything. If there are a few people saying, well, we can absorb you into our worldview, you're a good person, but if you think that their culture is going to overwhelm your culture, then all of your fears come to the surface. So the Irish were discriminated against. Not to the same level as in the United States, not nearly to the same level. But you can find lots of instances of kind of a casual racism. But when you get on the ground, people got along pretty well. Yes, welcome. Actually, you had your hand up before and I was ignoring you. Then we'll come to the front row and then we'll go to this individual. Okay, yes?
Okay, was the land, the firms, able to be negotiated before they came here? I say because family lore has it, my family settled in Shamrock, but the original firm they had, a couple of the brothers fell out and they switched, so they ended up on county line rather than the Kinghora Road.
I think it depended on the community. Either Kevin Farmer or Father Burke, I think it's Kevin Farmer. In the beginning, they laid out farms and they settled every second farm.
Yeah.
And they gave an option to the settlers, say, if you want, we'll give you a first option on renting the adjacent farm to you. So I think there was some element of choice. And that is something, to get control over your property, you survey it, right? So that even if it's woods, this is your property. Here's an axe, go make a home. So I think there is some choice. I know my Sharkey ancestor came out by himself in 1841, stayed on the Baldwin's Road the first winter, scouted out where he wanted to rent a farm, and he chose a farm, which I traveled that road all the time. It's the highest land. You can see 4 miles to the north from the hill where that farm is. That's not an accident.
Yeah, the same thing. It's, you can literally see from the hill, the bridge. And,
So, yeah, and then people, when there's still lots of land, like in Ireland, there's no land. But on PEI in 1830 and 40, if you don't like where you are, there's some opportunity to relocate someplace that's more to your needs. And of course, I didn't mention a lot of Irish are squatting, right? They just find some place where there doesn't appear to be a landlord or an agent. The Stewart estate, Robert Bruce Stewart, he has trouble with squatters all the time, trying to bring them to heel and survey their property. They don't like surveyors if you're a squatter. Okay, come here.
I was brought up by one of the finest BI business Irish structures that I've ever seen on this island.
The Benevolent Irish Society? Sorry, that was an
No,
advertisement.
in Emerald, in Emerald.
Oh, in Emerald, yes. Emerald had a BIS branch for decades.
Yes, I know.
And Surrey.
And I wondered if you can tell me why it was taken down after I left town, or?
I would ask you, because I've read the minutes of the BIS in Charlottetown, and they're always collaborating with Emerald. They go out to Emerald. Emerald is raising money to build a monument to Edward Whalen, and they keep waiting for the Charlottetown people to do something with their money, and eventually they take it back and they put in a stained glass window in the church. But the Emerald branch prospers for decades, and I don't know why it died out.
And people would come in trainloads for play, with plays, for the play, and take their plays there.
That's a very, yeah. I will say this, I'm looking at a fraternal organization on Prince Edward Island called the Ancient Order of Hibernians, which was founded in Charlottetown in 1889. There's a big American version, and there's an Irish version, and there's a Canadian version. They had a branch on PEI, and at the provincial exhibition in 1894, they had a contest. Which society is the popular one? And they beat the BIS all hollow, 847 to 347. And by 1930, they're gone. So I don't know why. Fraternal organizations, so someplace to hang out with your friends. Mutual insurance organizations, so you pay your membership dues and you get some insurance before there's a social net, a safety net. It's a way for Irish people to hang out together. So the more Irish you feel, the more you belong to that organization, not the Knights of Columbus, which is Catholic, mutual insurance. Anyway, I have a feeling that as that vivid sense of Irish identity waned a little bit, and as other organizations appeared to provide the things that that society had provided, I think some societies waned. And during the Depression, a lot of them, people couldn't pay their dues.
So where can I find out more about
The Emerald BIS, one of the places you can do is that the Robertson, again, the library at the university digitized the Charlottetown Examiner, which was not a Catholic newspaper, but it did have a sympathetic ear to Catholic affairs. And if you do a keyword search for the word Emerald or BIS, or you will find references to some of their events and to their meetings. I do not know whether or not there's a minute book at the archives. And Surrey did not last as long as Emerald. Emerald was, as you say, thriving. Anyway, I know a couple of other people had questions, and everyone else probably wants to have a nap by now.
You had mentioned about Father MacDonald and his role in terms of bringing in the Irish settlers and then his connection with the priests in Ireland. Have you ever come across any evidence where Owen Conley might have contributed some of his financial to
By
see
the
that?
time Owen Conley is rich, I think Irish immigration is over.
Yeah.
So he comes from County Monaghan, as I recall, and there's a story about the wedding ring falling through the floorboards in the church when he was getting married, and that was apparently an omen. Apparently that he was going to be rich. But again, I haven't done a lot of research on Owen
My brother
Conley.
did a fair bit of research on.
Well, there's a new book out on the Conley estate.
Yeah.
There's a great story, Owen Conley just starting out as a merchant, and in those days when the ship came in, you got to go and bid on the merchandise. Whoever bid the highest got to say, okay, I'll take this many of the cargo. So a bunch of the established people said, well, we'll let the young fella, we'll let him win his bid. He's just starting out. And he won his bid, and he said, I'll take the whole cargo. had vertically integrated business. He's quite fascinating and quite a philanthropist. But I don't think he was helping people come out. However, there's a priest from County Monaghan over here in the 1880s collecting money for a cathedral. And he goes to the bishop, and the bishop says, "No, you're not. I'm trying to collect money to build my cathedral." He said, "Okay," he said, "that's all right. I'll just go visit some of my relatives around PEI." And then he went and raised money for the cathedral back in County Monaghan. And the bishop didn't like it. So there's connections to Monaghan, and they're taking up collections during the next wave of famine, near famine, is 1878, 79, 1880. And they're taking up collections on PEI to send money back. And Connolly would have contributed to that because he didn't die till 1887 or something.
Yeah, he sent money. And he was very good at quietly giving people in the Charlottetown area who needed something without any.
Wasn't that what he was doing the day he died? He was writing an order to give a widow a load of coal.
Yeah, yeah.
The only individual we know that has got a bust on top of the building. Okay, George.
What language were the Irish that came to PEI speak?
C'est ça. The parts of Ireland that supplied most Irish immigrants to PEI had been, language assimilated already. And so they had fragments of Irish language. But if you want Irish speakers coming to PEI, they have to come from Kerry, from the west coast of Ireland, for the most part, or up north in Donegal. The southeastern part of Ireland was in the Pale since the 1500s. And even in Ulster, largely assimilated in terms of language. So there are Irish settling in Tignish area who are coming from the west of Ireland, definitely Irish speakers, but Dr. O'Grady concluded that there wasn't a lot of Irish language brought to PEI with the settlers. I know my mother she could do a bless herself in Irish, which I tried out on a colleague from Ireland. She said, it doesn't make any sense to me. And she knew one word, Amadon, which is Irish for fool.
Fool?
Yes, it was the same story. Her neighbors were trying to match her up with some young fella. She would have nothing to do with him because he was an Amadon. It's the only time she ever used the phrase. But that's an Irish expression. But she didn't know, her father didn't speak Irish. And so I don't think there's a lot.
They weren't allowed to go to school and stuff too, so there was a lot of that they didn't have written.
If the penal laws were enforced as written, the Irish had virtually no rights. Couldn't pass on property, couldn't go to school, Irish language. So it would have been difficult. Although the penal laws were not enforced fully in all parts of Ireland, it's the shadow of the penal laws that was an insult to the dignity and to the rights of Irish people, as opposed to necessarily their application. So I think we should probably work.
I think so. I think if any of you have questions.
And I told Mary that we need to do an announcement about the BIS.
We're going to do some.
Okay, good.
But before we do that, Mary, I want to, on behalf of the Bedeck Area Historical Society, to give you a small presentation to cover at least the cost of your gas and getting there. It's a little bit more than that.
Well, thank you, Doug.
Thank
I
you.
just want to say I consider the Bedeck meet so important. I got my hair cut today. I hope that this will cover the
You finished, I think.
I'm definitely.
I may need it. I developed a cold. I'm trying to avoid intimate contact with people. That was a terrific presentation. The level of interest in the audience was also terrific, and I'm sure many of you would have other questions that you want to ask Dr. Ed. I'm going to give Mary a chance to, Mary it is,
Yes,
and
yeah.
a chance
Thank
to
you.
say how hold this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. MacDonald. That was really interesting. My ancestors come from Pendergast and Cullen from Hope River, and Dean and Johnson from Middleton and Emerald. So full-on Irish background. But it really incorporated a lot of what you were saying, so I really appreciate it. I'm on the Benevolent Irish Society 200th Anniversary Committee, and this year is the 200th anniversary of the Benevolent Irish Society in PEI. And lots of events planned. There's actually, I have a poster here, which I'm going to leave here, but it's first lecture of our lecture series is Dr. MacDonald, and he's talking about about Edward Whalen. And it's called The Life, Death, and Afterlife of a Tragic Hero. And the Benevolent Irish Society Hall on the North River Road is called the Honourable Edward Whalen Hall. And there's 7 lectures happening. They're all free, and you just have to sign up. And the second one is on Owen Connolly by Leonard Cusack, who many of you might know, and he literally wrote the book. There's also, and we left a lot of these here. These give you a good rundown of everything going on. There's the lecture series, which is free. There are free Cayleys. One's happening in Emmyvale, one's happening in Kincora, and the one up in Tignish is almost full. I think it is full. But the one in Kincora has some places left. It's free. And the one in Emmyvale is also free. You just do need to register, that's all, because there's lunch served as well. So that's some of the free events. There's an Irish cultural fair going on with all kinds of workshops and everything happening at the Benevolent Irish Society Hall. And there's what else? There's Richard Wood Cayleys, which are 4 headliner events. So anyway, check it all out. There's the website, Benevolent Irish Society of PEI, and the information is here. So we encourage you to take it with you and spread the word. We'd really like to see lots of people for all these events. A lot of work gone into this for the last while.
Thank you, Mary, for that. I want to make a few announcements on behalf of the Bedeck Area Historical Society. This is the first of 6 talks, and next week we have another person, academic from the University of Prince Edward Island, and that's Dr. Joss McFadgen of one of the geographical sections of the university. Let me see, Applied Communication, Leadership and Cultural Program at UPEI. And he is going to talk about the Prince Edward Island in the 20th century as revealed by aerial photography, going back to the 1935 aerial survey of the island, which was the first, and the changes that occurred, and under the title of Village People, an aerial history of the decline and rise of small-town Prince Edward Island. Thereafter, we have 4 more talks, and I'm not going to list them, but you can get a list of the talks before you go from the front desk here. We have a number of other, I want to bring to your attention another talk that Dr. Edward MacDonald is going to be giving, and it's not very far away, on Thursday, July 17th. You remember this, I hope.
Yes, I have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, in the Charlottetown Public Library at 7 p.m. Dr. MacDonald is going to be speaking on, the title will be PEI, Prince Edward Island Loyalists and the Land Question, which is a topic which is of great interest to members of the Society, as we have a lot of information on the Loyalist settlement of this area. So that's on July 17th, Thursday, 7 p.m. at the Rotary Club boardroom at the Charlottetown Public Library. We have a number of events going on in the museum, and one of these is in 2 weeks' time, less than 2 weeks' time. We're having a hot roast turkey dinner at the Bedeck United Church. There are only 100 places. It's a fundraising event. Tickets are $30 per person. Last year, it was a sellout, and it was highly praised in terms of the quality of the meal. So you can get tickets here, or you can contact the museum. We require payment for booking because of a need to guarantee a place. So that's Friday, July 18th at 6 p.m. We have a seafood raffle here. Tickets for our raffle, part of our fundraising events. The first prize is a $250 voucher from Waddell's Ship Mart in Summerside for any seafood you wish. It doesn't all you don't have to eat it all at once or get it all at once. You can do it in installments. And the second prize is $125 worth of oysters from Future Seafood. I'm afraid you have to get those all at once. It's an actual box of 100 oysters worth $125. So you'll have to plan a party if you win that one. And the third prize is a $50 voucher from Waddell's for seafood. We have memberships in the society for those who aren't members. They're $25 per person. It gives you complete access to the museum at all times that we're open or by arrangement, at other times when the museum is not open, and a newsletter indicating all our activities of the summer and other times of the year. And those are $25 for individuals and $30 for families. And also we have, last summer, our museum manager, who was with us for a year and a half, organized tours of Holman's Island in Summerside Harbor. And we are continuing those. I am taking the tours. I took the tours in June, and we had a terrific time in terms of weather, and a walk around the island is really a good exercise as well. It is a fundraising activity as well, and you have to book those in advance. And they're only on certain days of the year or the month, and the next is July 23rd and 24th, and then there's another month before the tides are suitable. So there are only four trips available, and they are in August, and we have information on our website on those. I think that is everything. Have I forgotten anything? I haven't said, I actually live in Ireland. I'm probably the only person in this room who lives in Ireland. And I sort of disguised the fact, and you probably wouldn't even think I did. But I've lived there in Belfast since 1973, I think. 73, so over 50 years in Ireland, and I appreciated the visit back to the country. I just left in May. I spend the summers here, but I was born in Summerside. So it's interesting to hear about the Irish side of the story from this side of the Atlantic. And, so I thank you all for coming. There are refreshments at the back, juice and cookies. And if you would like to leave a donation, you can either do so in any of the baskets you see, or